over in Serie A, one of the teams that has done the most business, although it's one-way traffic, I must say, is Milan, Lars. They've been cashing in shifting their players, but not necessarily spending the money that they've got from shifting their players. What's going on there?
Well, they have cashed in. One of the reasons they've cashed in quite so much is because they got a whopping great fee for Tiani Reinders, probably more than they were expecting from Manchester City. And Theo Hernandez, the ever exciting left back, has moved on to the Saudi League for a pretty significant fee, and that of course takes a big chunk of money off the wage bill as well. So that's freed up a few things for Milan. The thing about Milan is, and regular listeners will know this, but it bears repeating, this is not the Milan of 15, 20 years ago. This is not the Milan of the Berlusconi era. They're owned by Redbird Capital Partners, an American investment group, and they have, under Redbird, kind of gone pretty big on this sort of Moneyball-inspired approach. Of trying, instead of making big splashy signings, instead of going for big names, they want to try to find like some marginal gains here and there and find inefficiencies in the market. My gut tells me there are some consultants with Excel documents and spreadsheets who have made a fair bit of money off of advising Milan's owners for how to go about these things, and it is an approach that, as I understand it, has been enormously unpopular with their fans, because that isn't really what Milan should be about in a lot of their views. But what we'll see on the pitch, the thing that's a little bit weird is that they're pairing this Moneyball approach with bringing in Max Allegri, who is a coach who has a strong record of winning things, of course, but he isn't like the most charming, swashbuckling coach. He's very, very defensive. But one of the virtues of Max Allegri is that he's not like Conte, who will just come in and demand, I want this, I want this, I want that, and if not, I'm going to talk to the media constantly about how bad everything is. Like Max Allegri doesn't do that. He will come in, he will get the team organized, he will make them harder to beat this year, and then what they still have Rafael Leao. There were some rumors of Bayern looking at him, but with them going for Luis Diaz, I guess that's not happening. So Rafael Leao can be a one-man attack, like on the counter. Like when he is on, he is terrifying. So I suspect what they'll do this season, as you said, they made some money. I don't think they'll make big signings because that's just not what the current ownership does. And I think Allegri will try to get them organized. They'll play quite conservatively. They have brought in Luka Modric, old man Modric, to pull some strings in midfield. And the idea is to release Rafa Leao and a couple of other slightly speedy players they have on the counter. And I don't think they're winning the Scudetto anytime soon, but I think they can maybe fight for a Champions League spot. Wouldn't shock me. I mean, it could work. It might not be amazing to watch, but it could work.
Yeah, what should Milan be aiming for this season, David? After last season's, I suppose you would argue, debacle in terms of finishing 8th in La Liga, their worst placing for a decade. And like Lars says, it's not the Milan of old. However, they have got the history there. And you look at the signings, you're thinking, well, as much as, Estepinian is a player that we have seen at Brighton and, he's not a bad player, but like Milan, surely you should be aiming for higher.
Yeah, but come on, Milan's been like this for quite a while. When have Milan been on the radar? When was the last time they were on the radar as an elite club? They just haven't been. And so you can't attract those players. I don't really see too much improvement from last season. I think between 6th and 8th, that's honestly where I see them. That's where I see this squad. I don't see it any higher than that. I think other teams would have to have a really bad season for Milan to capitalise. I think if they bring in Jashiri, that's a really good signing. And that's the sort of signing they should be making. I think if you're Milan now, you want to be working with young players you can develop. And then hope that kicks you on. But yeah, I think they will finish it around about the same as they did last year.
Yeah, you mentioned Arden Jashiri there, David, from Club Brugge. What signed for 39 million euros, by the way. What do you expect from him in this Milan squad? What can he bring to it?
It's the exact thing I think they need. They've lacked, I think, a little bit of spark in midfield in terms of somebody who can balance midfield, but also provide attacking support. And I think that's what they need. I think if you watch Milan a lot, you'll see a lot of what they do tends to come from Rafael Leao, and then they tend to try and find him and bring him into play and what he can do. I think if you're an opponent, you can easily stub that out, and then Milan have lacked a few ideas, and I think Jashiri will just bring a little bit of invention midfield, a little bit of guile in midfield that can, help Milan control games a bit more and approach things and attack things in a different way.
They've got all this money, Lars. Should they be spending still before? Because the Serie A has got a couple of weeks to go before they kick off. So it's still time, isn't it, for Milan to shore up their resources. But if David's saying, look, they can expect more of the same from last season, this season, well, why not just keep the money and build it up as a war chest and use it when you really need it?
Well, I do think they really need it. I think what David just said about their over-reliance on Rafael Leao is completely true. And I actually kind of think this is low-key a big season for Christian Pulisic, because Pulisic, as I think he's embraced the more European pronunciation of his name after insisting for a long time he was Pulisic, which was very confusing for everyone. Because Theo Hernandez going to Saudi is kind of a big deal, because he was a left back, but he was also he's a very enterprising left back, is Theo Hernandez. Not quite like Trent Alexander-Arnold levels, but he is he provided a lot of the attacking thrust for that team, making sort of raids down the left flank. And just in terms of how they're going to progress the ball forward down the field, they've lost quite a bit with him going. And Estepinian is good, but maybe not quite as much. So you're going to need someone to move the ball forward. Luka Modric in midfield will obviously be a huge help with this, but he's not going to play every week, probably. Certainly not going to play 90 minutes every week because of his age. And they need someone who can make stuff happen. And it can't all be on Rafael Leao, because he is really brilliant when he's on Leao, but he can't do it every single game. So I would like to see them, and I'm sure AC Milan fans as well, would like to see them bring in one more attacking player they can get a little bit excited about. And maybe Ashari will be a revelation out of Club Brugge. But I feel like they need a little bit more going forward, especially bearing in mind they're probably going to be set up quite defensively under Allegri. So you need more dudes who can do interesting things in attack here, I think.
I think you've both concluded, David, that Milan aren't going to win a trophy this season. Not any significant one in any case. They're not going to win the Scudetto. They're not going to win the Coppa Italia. Is what seems to be emerging from this conversation, at least. I wonder if the one
could fluke a cup. It wouldn't shock me, because I'm not I don't get excited about Allegri just because, as a casual observer, as someone who isn't a Milan fan, his teams are usually not very fun to watch, and this is already a squad that's a little low on vibes and creativity, and you bring in a very quite boring coach to coach them. That, as a neutral, makes me think, might not make too much space for Milan games in my calendar this season. But here's the thing. I wouldn't be shocked if they fluked the Coppa Italia, for instance, with a very solid defensive baseline and sort of Rafael Leao running rampant on the counter. I can see it working. I just think it'll be pretty dull a lot of the time.
I suppose the one fillip in this, one positive angle of this, David, is that their local rivals, Inter, may have a, different season than they've had previously, not least now with a new coach and so on. Is that, do you see this season being less good for Inter? It may not be better for Milan, but less good for Inter, and that might somewhat save Max Allegri, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, look, they're making a huge changeover. They're making a huge transition. I think it's the biggest one. They've lost their coach that, that they brought out all their solidity and success through, and they're changing up. And Lars has touched on Milan's lack of vibes there. Well, Inter have said, we've been really good, but maybe we could use some new vibes. And they are clearly trying to be a bit more exciting, a bit more unpredictable next season, I think. We absolutely know for the past few years what we were going to get from Inter. They had everything written on the tin and they delivered it every single time. Now they kind of, they've brought in a few players who you'd say, okay, that's a little bit out of the mold, out of the remit under Inzaghi, which is rightly so, because they've got to go in a new direction. So I don't expect them to be as consistent. I don't expect them to be as solid, but I definitely do expect them to, just pose a few new questions, basically, and that makes it really interesting. And that's why I think they'll be one of the more fascinating watches this season, actually, especially given, how steady everything has been under Inzaghi and just how they react to him leaving, and a change up in style, perhaps, is going to make them such a fascinating watch this year.
This is such an opportunity for Napoli, though, isn't it, Lars?
Yeah, that's definitely a way of looking at it. To win another Scudetto, I guess then the question is whether Conte can not lose this. I'm trying to find a non-super disrespectful.
Implode.
Yeah, can you go through 2 full seasons with Conte without something exploding and everything catching fire and things going completely wrong? You never really know, right? He's not known for long. Conte has done what it says on the tin. He's brought in, he's been brought in, he's made a lot of noise, he's won a championship. It's what Conte does. What Conte doesn't tend to do is stay for a long time and provide long-term happiness. But I do agree with you in your assessment, with Inter being a little bit up in the air, with an inexperienced coach taking over, and you look at the other teams, and do you think Juventus are looking fabulous? Kind of no. And Roma under Gasperini will be incredibly fascinating, but I'm not expecting them to be a title contender straight away. And Milan, we've talked about, we're not super excited about. So in terms of the field, isn't looking super strong. So there's an opportunity there for Napoli. I would agree with that.